Wicked. So I think we will begin, as most people in now. So first and foremost, thank you to everyone for joining us today. I think we are in our sixth discussion. Unfortunately, Whitney isn't able to join us today. She sends her regards, so I will be stepping in place, and I will be your moderator. Paul's giving me the thumbs up. So yes, thanks guys. Bear with me. So we have Mel Rudder and Loretta Andrews, and hopefully David will be joining us from No Signal as well throughout the discussion. And as you know, you can tell the discussion is about Black music and the radio funnel. I think this is a discussion that's kind of been long anticipated from when we started this series at the beginning of the year. So we're excited to kind of have this discussion and see if there's any kind of outcomes or synergies to hear from everybody on the call today.
Can you just explain what you mean by a funnel?
Yes, we will get into that in the discussion, definitely. Was that you, Paul?
It was, yeah.
Yeah, cool, Paul Kennedy. No worries. Yeah, we will get into that further in the discussion, and I'll explain all. So without further ado, I will let the ladies who we have at the moment introduce themselves, what they do, and then yeah, we'll head straight into it. So if we start off, Mel, you've unmuted. There you go.
I knew you were going to come to me first. Hi everyone, nice to meet you. I'm Mel Rudder. I am a national and specialist radio plugger. I also do a bit of everything as well, but I had 16 long years at Atlantic Records doing club promotions into radio promotions, and then I left and I have flourished with my own company, my own plugin company. So I've been doing that for the last 4 years. So that's me.
Right. And Loretta?
Hi everyone. So I'm an artist manager. I manage Jake Isaac, Governor B, Joshua Luke Smith, Bianca Rose, and Madison Ryan Ward. And I guess my connection with radio is, so I was an artist a very long time ago as a teenager. And then I did that for many years, worked as a session singer and kind of knew the music industry that way. And then I decided to retrain. And at university, I ended up majoring in radio after just kind of doing a taster course, and I fell in love with the media of radio and a completely changed career and worked in radio for about 14 years, and worked my way up from an assistant producer to breakfast host. Then I actually piloted a show for emerging artists because I was still working with a band with my sister. And that turned into a live event. And then when I left the radio station, I was the drive time presenter at the time. So I left with the help of the MMF on the accelerator program to go full-time in music management. So there was an overlap. In fact, it was doing my unsigned show that I first was asked to become a manager. So I haven't worked in radio now for a couple of years. Well, it seems stupid now, but at the time I left right before the pandemic. So it was a great time to leave my regular job. So I'm a bit out of touch with how radio is now, but I certainly can talk about my experience working in what was a niche station. I worked for a station called Premier Radio and their sister station, Premier Gospel. So exclusively around Black music, particularly for Premier Gospel. And with my own artists, the challenges I've had with getting them onto radio and the few successes that we've had in the last year. But yeah, looking forward to contribute what I can.
Right, amazing. Thank you, Loretta. And as I can see, as we was doing introductions, we also have David from No Signal joining us. Hi, David. If you can just give us an introduction to yourself and to No Signal.
Hi, I'm David, co-founder at No Signal. We birthed through the pandemic. We started before, but it was more of like a live show that we just streamed on air. It wasn't really much of a radio station. Then throughout the pandemic, we just built up to many shows which we now do 15 hours a day, and we're about to start. We did our first 24-hour stream the other day. But yeah, so I'm David.
Oh, wicked. Well, thank you guys. And I think we'll just head straight into it. And kind of the first question is, what is the process of getting artists featured or played within radio? So I think we'll start from you, Mel, as far as being a radio plugger. How do you kind of go about getting artists on radio?
There's many things to consider before going to radio. Sometimes I talk myself out of jobs quite a lot because I don't think there's not that many avenues at radio. So everyone's kind of fighting for the same position and the same plays. You know, as you will probably know, most radio stations have a playlist of about 20, 30 records. And then, so those are played in rotation. And then you've got the opportunity to get free, each show or each station has free plays. And there's not that many free plays. So sometimes I say to a lot of people that ask me to start plugging an artist from very early on in the artist's career, sometimes I'm like, just hold back and build elsewhere, because you know, you can imagine how much music these radio stations are getting per day. You know, this week alone, I am plugging 14 records per week. That's on average. You can imagine all the other pluggers are probably kind of doing the same. You know, there's not a lot of room for, you know, those kind of plays early on. So it's actually quite good to build elsewhere. And that might be building through socials or having a track on, you know, on YouTube and getting lots of followers through that. You know, there's different ways to doing that. And I always say to people that radio is actually one of the last things that you do. You know, if you've got other things in place beforehand, if you've got a bit of a following, then you should actually look at radio. But it's not the first thing that I would look at.
Thank you. Interesting. And I think let's go on to yourself, David, from a radio's perspective. How do you kind of go about getting artists, or how do artists go about getting played within a station like yours?
So okay, I'll just connect it to my headphones. Could you say that question again?
Okay, yeah, no, sure. Yeah, so it's just, what's the process of an artist kind of getting radio play on like a local community station like yours? What's the process of that?
So at the moment we have our music team. I currently head the music team at the moment, and we have a lot of relationship with a lot of pluggers, which we meet regularly, and they plug their music, but we also give the opportunity for artists to also submit music as well. There's an email that we have that we give to artists, because we also, the way we kind of got our popularity is because we was putting on a lot of artists that are kind of like unsung and unheard. So that's how we got kind of popular throughout the pandemic, because we was breaking a lot of artists. A lot of artists who played, they wouldn't have pretty much, they probably have like 1,000 Spotify streams, and we'll play them on our most popular shows in the pandemic, and within a month, their streams are like in 100,000, 200,000, 300,000. They're like #1 in Shazam charts, the Spotify trending charts. Like we was making a lot of movements for songs that were like very small. So we thought, okay, cool, it's best to keep it in like instead of us just supporting the people that already get a lot of the support, we were supporting a lot of artists that was just good music, but they're not really that big yet. So we kind of allow people to submit music as well. And also, we do try to keep it as well as much as our taste as well. Because another thing is that sometimes people that submit music, they don't necessarily listen to our station, so they don't understand, okay, if their song will actually work at our station as well. As much as we like to take as much genres as we can, we also understand our audience and if they're going to react to it, if they're going to like it as well, which I don't think a lot of artists understand. They just be submitting so much music, and they don't, okay, would this song actually fit? on our signal, or would it fit on a different station? I think that's another thing that artists also need to take note of as well.
Definitely, we will definitely touch on audiences a little bit later. So Loretta, from an artist manager's perspective, kind of listening to what Mel's also said, how do you kind of go about getting your artists on radio?
Yeah, I mean, the journey has been particularly, as Mel said, basically. So I think that it is definitely the last thing you do. I mean, if you're going to work with a plugger, it is expensive, and we know that particularly if it's black music, the success rate is potentially minimal. So there's so many other things that you would do before allocating an amount of the budget to that, and also that would be creating as much buzz yourself. So I think probably the most recent example of where we've seen how that journey is, and particularly referring back to the funnel that we were talking about, is probably with my artist Governor B. So to start with, I mean, historically he was very much many years ago only known as kind of a gospel rapper. So in the UK we've only got 2 major Christian stations, so there's lots of smaller ones, but you've got a choice of 2. So even then you have gatekeepers, because the main Christian stations would play kind of white worship music. So I say this because a lot of it comes down to race, more than we would even think so, in terms of who make the decisions. And then with the emergence of, more of a niche station like Premier Gospel, which catered for a massive part of the black church in the UK, then there was, a certain kind of music that was played then. So then you've got other barriers in terms of genre and things to go against. But I think he probably got his early support from that kind of scene and doing a lot of schools work. And then our sort of next step, just to literally say it in steps in how it's worked, would be local radio and things like Represent, who were great with giving us early interviews and things like that. And local London stations, youth stations in particular, where he'd already accumulated a lot of streams from young people and from doing schools tours and that kind of thing. And then I guess the next stage up would be like getting spot play and things with Capital Extra. And then eventually we managed to get some spot play with 1Extra. And then last year we got our first playlisting with 1Extra. But it was going round that cycle quite a few times before we got to that point, and even getting to the stage where they would each time be very happy to give spot play amongst a lot of the stations, and great feedback about the songs, but getting that kind of playlisting position was a lot more difficult. And then when we would ask questions about, well, what does it take to get over to Radio 1, they'd be like, oh, you really need to be in the 1Extra space for a lot longer first, and more playlisting, and then perhaps do things like Live Lounge, and then maybe aim for Animax Hottest Record, and that there's a very trajectory that wasn't, my friends who manage artists who weren't black weren't necessarily explained to it in that way, but I've just always been told that's the way it is. And I think when you work with independent artists anyway, you're like, okay, that's the grind, let's get down and do it. And it's only been more recently I'm like, oh, not everyone has this many hoops to jump through and things to jump over, but that's kind of been my experience of it. And then, for example, with Jake Isaac, I mean, I've only been managing Jake for just over a year, but I know in the past he was just outright told his music wouldn't be played on radio. I think things have changed a bit now, and certainly with our next project, I think we would like to go for that. But again, I would only take advice from somebody like Mel on that, on whether it was worth us to do it, who would really give you an answer, not just want to kind of take your money, but whether it's worth it. But I think people like Michael Kiwanuka have opened the door for people like Jake, because the feedback was between the lines, we don't get that kind of black music, because he was a black guy with a guitar, basically. But obviously Michael Kiwanuka, Arlo Parks, people like that go. But again, still there's a route there. We were told to try 6 music first and go that way, try Radio 2 and that kind of thing.
Wow, thank you for sharing that. It's very interesting. I think picking up on something that you've said about bringing race into the factor, we looked at some data from PPL and talking from black music with black artists, it seems as though since 2014 that no one's featured within their most played artists. So, and that's not necessarily reflective of the charts. because we've seen people like Stormzy, Dave, loads of other artists get charted to #1, but for some reason they don't seem to be the most played. Do we know potentially why that is? So, Mel.
Somebody's at my door.
Oh, no worries. Let's swing it to...
I'll be right back. 1 second.
No worries. David?
I don't know if there's really a direct answer in it. As Loretta kind of like really touched on it, really, like there's a lot of these people, it kind of reflects what they are seeing. Do you know what I mean? What these people look like. Because even if they do like hire like 1 black person or 2 black people, the majority there that work at these companies are like white people. So they really are gonna choose that. It's so sad to say, but I wouldn't say it's ignorance. I don't even know what to call it. Maybe they just don't know any better. But we can clearly know that even minus Dave and Stormzy, there's just so many people in the past 12 months that's done crazy things in the charts. The example of Simba, he was at what, #2? They didn't want to put him on Capital or Kiss, I can't remember. They just didn't want to put him on mainstream radio because they said it wasn't big enough, but he was #2 in the charts. And it's like, yo, that was like pure ignorance, because that was like a huge, huge moment in the culture. And like on No Signal, our fan base don't necessarily listen to like Simba because it's much younger people, but we supported that because of that moment was so big. It was like undeniable, and there's some undeniable moments. And sometimes you got to understand, okay, something that's so undeniable, you just have to support, you just have to playlist it. For example, at No Signal, we scream out black radio, we support black culture. But amongst black culture, there is other people that are not black that do make the same type of music. And in our scene, there are undeniable moments. For example, the Ardy, he was undeniable, so we had to playlist it because like, yo, our people are listening to this, they're taking it in. So we could have been ignorant and do the same thing as them and be like, no, he's white, but we couldn't do that because it was an undeniable moment. So it doesn't make sense to me why these people are ignoring our people when it comes to like most listened or most played, as you mentioned. But yeah, I don't know if there's a straight answer for it because it's deeper than music.
You have to take into account who are making those decisions. And if you know the teams at Radio 1, IS, Capital FM, you know, they don't see what we might necessarily see. They're not in the culture. I'll tell you, in certain radio stations, there might be 1 black member of the team, and then the rest of them are white, and you know they know their indie music and they'll know their pop music. But in terms of black music, I think that you know, sometimes it sounds crazy, but we're in a bit of a bubble when it comes to black music and black culture, and people don't see what we see. Like for instance, my old boss at Atlantic, I remember going on his Instagram account, and there was an event going on that same day. I think it was like the GQ Awards or something like that. And I remember taking his phone and going through his Instagram account, and there was no mention of Stormzy, Dave. Like it was just, it just, his Instagram account just looked so alien to me, because I was like, he doesn't see what I see on the Shade Borough or, you know, on those TikTok accounts or things like that. So actually, they're not seeing what we see. So they don't see any hype. They don't see what people are talking about. All they see is the numbers that come from, hopefully, a plugger. And if the plugger hasn't really given them an impression of how big it actually is, they can only go by the little stats that they've got. And by the time they discuss it every Tuesday or every Wednesday, it's a week too late, and the track's already at number 5 in the chart or something like that. You know, the one about Simba, you know, they didn't know who he was. They hadn't heard of him before. So they were like, who is this guy? And it actually didn't just come from the mainstream stations. those conversations were happening at the specialist stations. One Extra did not want to support Simba because they didn't know who he was and where he had come from. You know, you always believe that, you know, as Loretta said, you've got to build a story. So you've got to build from the ground up. And for them, Simba came out of nowhere and he's on this massive record that for them just came from nowhere. So they were like, well, he hasn't earned his stripes. He doesn't deserve to be on One Extra or Capital Extra or whatever it was at the time. Or they got it wrong and eventually they did support, but it took a long time. And by that time, it was already top 5 or whatever it was. So, you know, it's a strange one because, you know, it's the teams that are making these decisions. That's why things are a little bit slow, can be a little bit slow. And also, radio is a reflection of what is going on with the rest of, you know, the culture and the industry. You know, radio can talk about how they can break records and, you know, they can make stars and all that kind of stuff. Not really. Stuff has to be happening elsewhere for them to understand. You know, they look at stats and they make a decision off of stats, really. So, you know, I think they are more of a reflection of what's going on elsewhere. That's why I say, you know, sometimes it's not just about you getting 1 or 2 plays on radio really, really early on. It's about building your story elsewhere. Because, you know, if you want me to take your record into radio, I need a story to tell them, really. But things are changing. Things are getting a little bit better. You know, Radio 1 are going much earlier on things and not expecting a big story. You know, with Arlo Parks, you know, they've gotten that pretty early on without big stats coming through. But they felt that was really important. Same with Celeste. And even Bella went on the playlist last week, and she's been an important artist for No Signal, for instance, and Represent. And she's built from the real specialist stations and got that great relationship with those and really built through that into One Extra, Capital Extra, Kiss, into Radio 1. So, you know, without having those big numbers, Radio 1 has recognised that, you know, maybe they should be supporting an artist like Bella early on, and continuing to support her journey from now.
Yeah, no, definitely. I think Loretta touched on it a little bit earlier, but do we think that part of it's to do with potentially the genre in which the artist is associated with? So there has been discussions that a lot of the time artists are feeling pigeonholed, insofar as maybe their first 2 tracks were, for example, jazz, but now they want to break out into something a bit more soulful, maybe a bit more kind of gospel-y, and because of their previous tracks, they're not being able to get that push. Do we feel as though genres have a big influence insofar as why artists may not be getting, say, playlisted or charted?
I think so. I think that's something that artists come up, whatever the genre. Again, to go back to Governor B, there was a stage, you know, quite a few years ago now, where, you know, kind of Christian stations were saying he wasn't Christian enough, and the non-Christian ones were saying he was too Christian. So that's not even a genre thing. And I'm sure we've all been in situations as well when you've been told you're too black for this or you're not black enough for that. And they mean in terms of your character. I mean, what's black enough? What's too black? So I think sometimes with the gatekeepers and with the wider pictures, there's a stereotype of what black music should be like, and the genres that they are, and they need to stay within those. And not only can you not change lane, but even colouring those to be slightly different from what it's previously known as is a challenge sometimes. And I think the argument that radio stations have used, and certainly at the radio station I worked at, is it always comes back to the audience. This is what our audience wants. This is what our audience wants. That's the argument that you're given when I try to bring in new things, or why don't we try this? And my argument with that, and probably anyone Paul has definitely heard me say this loads of times, Paul Potter, but I really see it as it was historically with labels, and it's particularly the same with radio stations. It's like a restaurant which just has 3 things on the menu, and you're told, well, that's what's on the menu, so this is what our customers like. And it wasn't until, that's been blown apart with streaming and things, when there's 50 million things on the menu, that suddenly people are like, well, actually, I really like that, and I like that. And there's all sorts of tastes to cater for. But stations where they believed they were breaking artists is because they presented their 4 things and it was consumed by a large amount. And they didn't have to think about the people they weren't catering for. But my argument here is that, of course, we know there are audiences. You only have to look at the massive streaming numbers of these, young guys who have only put their music up on YouTube or on SoundCloud. So there is an audience there. But if you're not serving that up in the restaurant, then people can't consume it. So sometimes this argument that's been given about, well, our audience doesn't like that, is a bit redundant. And I think the only way that we can change that is by saying this isn't a thing about genre. It's actually about reflecting. Well, like Mel said, they're reflecting, but actually reflecting what's actually going on, not just reflecting what you've already created, because otherwise it's just this vicious cycle. And it's very easy to prove that, because then you have radar figures and you have stats. And I think across the board in Black culture, we don't have as many researchers and academics who are looking into Black culture to be able to back up all sorts of things. For example, my sister's a music psychologist, and she's one of something like 3 Black academics in that field. So even those things we can't arm ourselves to prove. Yet if you can get a young guy who's got millions and millions of streams on YouTube, surely that's evidence that there's an audience there. I didn't really provide a solution in that, but I just feel like they're missing the argument that's given is actually perpetuating something that they're controlling, if that makes sense.
No, yeah, that definitely does make sense. And I think we've touched on it. So do we feel as though there's no diversity behind the radio stations, so those that are the gatekeepers within these more, in particular, major stations, as in the producers?
Simple answer, no, it's not enough. There isn't. They're trying to change that. When I'm talking about the mainstream stations, there isn't enough. They know it. They're trying to change it, but it's taken a while, unfortunately.
100%. There's not enough. I remember during the pandemic when we kind of started and things was kind of going off for us, because I also work at a record label too, but at that time people didn't really know that I was doing this on the side as well. So I remember we had a meeting, and a big radio station, we won't say their name, came and did the presentation like about 3 months into the pandemic, and they're like, oh, they're changing the way they work, and they're changing their ethos, blah, 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 and they're going to hire some more Black people for this, and they were comparing our numbers. In the presentation, no signal came up, and obviously they still didn't know that I was like co-founder of the station. I'm just there as a label person, and they had our numbers there compared to their like specialist side of their show, and it was like the same numbers we was doing as them. And they were like, yeah, like, so we need to do this. We're going to have a breakfast show that has a Black person, and this, we're going to bring this person, and like, and even taking people from our station. And it was like, yo, you see, everything was very like reactive. And then once that kind of died down, it was like, once they've got those people in there, 6 months later, there's nothing. It's like they're just there to tick a box. There's no progression in the shows. There's no progression in what they do in their playlist. It's still the same thing. It's just like a box tick. So they're very reactive. I give that to them, but no action, no real action actually gets taken when it comes to diversity in producers, diversity in presenters, and all of that stuff as well.
think we can't ignore as well the kind of intersectionality of class as well, because radio is quite a middle class profession, because most people who get into it have had to intern for free or have parents who can pay for them to literally, I mean, who has that, you know, I say normal, you know what I mean? People who don't necessarily have that wealth behind them to enable them to just intern for their full job or do all the night shifts and things and all the crap shifts that you have to do on radio in order to get a job on a major station and that kind of thing. And just like we've always had to do, you create your own culture for us to see our culture reflected. So ironically, one difference is when I did work at Premier Gospel and Premier, overwhelmingly it was black staff actually, and my boss was a black male, his boss was a black female, the head of media and marketing was a black female, but that's so unusual in radio, and it's because the station was niche for black culture. And yeah, we've had to do that. We've had to create these pockets to serve it. And there is a lot of lip service in the bigger stations. But even to illustrate that class thing, a TV plugger was telling me recently how they were contacting a station that had brought in a black person. I won't mention the station, I won't mention the show, but the black person they'd brought in didn't know who Little Sims was. So then I'm like, well, firstly, I find that amazing in this day and age and in radio anyway, but also that's got to be from a certain background if you don't know that. And that just is revealing again of where class comes into it. And that's just again a cultural thing as well. So, you know, grime wasn't taken seriously. Oh, that's just a phrase but it sprung up anyway, and it will. Where there's life in something, it's not gonna hold it back. But I think the frustrating thing is the long way round that we have to go, and then it's jumped on and then usually exploited and taken over a little bit. That's my cynical side. I'll get more positive now.
No, thank you, Loretta. And it touches on a lot of stuff. So I think it was Paul earlier in the conversation I think there was a few Pauls. I think it was Paul Kennedy, correct me if I am wrong, that was asking about this black funnel in which we've titled, and Loretta's kind of spoken on it earlier as far as serving the need of the people, but it was an analogy which someone, I think it was Kwame, I'm not sure if he's on the call today, but it was this funnel, and the analogy that he's given is like, if you imagine a bottle and the entry, that point that you come through is the neck, and it's at that moment in time, especially if you're in what seems to be a niche genre, there's only potentially space for one or a few of you, and at that bottleneck you can go either way. You can either get chucked out, or you can kind of follow it through by being pushed through by someone else and join in kind of the bigger end, or you kind of have to wrangle your way through until you get to that bigger aspect. So that's kind of what we mean, similar when we say the black funnel. There isn't kind of a free for all. There is a process similar to what Loretta explained earlier, and we'll kind of get more into a particular funnel as we go into the conversation today. But that's kind of what we meant by it.
Yeah, I figured that was the case. I just want to jump in here and be a little bit objective, all right? I'm a white guy with a black family, black missus, black kids, right? But as some of the people that have been around, I've been doing black music my whole career and done pretty well at it, right? So The Influence, Soul to Soul, Showdown and Mark Morrison, been involved in all their careers, right? What people are missing here, and I know there's a massive problem at radio as far as diversity and employees, but what people are missing here is something that Loretta picked up about genre, right? When you're starting, a northern-based new genre, we are in England, right? Some radio station like Radio 1 or Radio 2 is not going to jump on that. They're reactive now. They follow Spotify, right? So I really, as somebody that's worked this music for 25 years, if you think about the 90s, loose ends, soul to soul, imagination, the music that people were making was more suitable for a demographic like England, which is a diverse community. if you're only making something grind trap, that doesn't necessarily reflect the wider culture of England until it connects, which is then why the stations come on board later. And I acknowledge there's a massive problem at radio. You know, I've got 2 black artists signed on my own label, one of which Mel championed for me at Atlantic. And I'm struggling. I've got friends at radio, Russ Kwame, give me a play, Shawnee B, Trevor Nelson every now and again. But I'm also very aware that I have to make the records that are going to fit radio. I don't think we can't always just say...
Some unmuted, sorry.
Sorry. Yeah, I don't think we can always just default to the, you know, an issue, because lots, you know, trying to think of something current, Emily Sande does pretty well at radio, right? And so does Laura Malula. And, you know, some would say Emily does well because she's light skinned. Well, why does Laura do well? It's also about the music we make. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, no, definitely. I think that's kind of... Oh, go on, David.
So, I agree to an extent. I do agree to an extent for... Maybe it was just an example he was making, but like grime or drill now, like that's what the younger kids listen to, is very much popular and mainstream music. For the past 3 years, it's been doing very, very well for the artists, for the labels, for the managements, for all the people around it.
I'm struggling with promoters right now, right?
Sir?
I've got SPGOMG on my label, publishing a label. I'm struggling with him at radio.
Yeah. Then I think
there's 8,000 records a day being released.
Yeah, so that's the issue. There is the genre is not that it doesn't reflect what's happening, because it does. It's just oversaturated. So you have to be exceptional. So every time a drill artist comes to play me music, say a drill artist comes to me now, like the only drill artist that I've signed ever is Unknown T. Any artist that comes to me now, I'm like, yo, listen, I'm not gonna lie to you. You have to be exceptional, because there's so much. Every kid that wants to make music now, the first beat they're gonna type in is a drill type beat. They're not typing Nathan Dorr type beat, or I don't know. They're typing drill type beat. Every kid that's 15, 14. So it's like you have to be so exceptional that you're doing, like, if you're rapping, you have to be the best in drill. If you're doing R&B, if you're doing something that's not so much saturated, or if you're doing even Afrobeats is getting there now, but like drill at the moment is probably the most saturated genre in London, like in UK in general. Like you go on the bus in any area, whether you're in Manchester, Birmingham, the kids are probably listening to a drill song. So it's not that it's not reflective, it's just oversaturated. So for advice for your artist is that he's got to go in the studio and go harder. He's got to come out with a smash hit straight off the bat, because you can't afford to be laid back in a genre like that.
No, totally. I mean, you know, over the years, I've seen it gone from less than 500 records a week to 80,000 a day. Think about that. Put that in perspective, right? So the competition is not just about color, race. It's you've got to think about your demographic. We are in England, whether we like it or not. You know, I love my Afrobeat and R&B. They're my core and rap, right? That's my core love. But I know when I sign Chris Shane or I sign SPOMG that I've got a battle where in Africa, they're still playing records that Mel was plugging for me at Atlantic when Chris was on Atlantic. Because it's got Pat Rankin on it, right? It's still on daytime radio because it represents that demographic. So I just wanted to be a little bit objective about it, because, you know, in the 80s and the 90s, when we were doing Salt Soul and stuff like that, the records that got on radio were, as you say, Dave, exceptional records.
I disagree, because I think the disparity was there before now. So before Spotify was around, and before, sorry, have I frozen?
No, go ahead, Laura. We can hear you.
I said before Spotify was around and before it was saturated, we still had racial disparity. I think it is about race. I think there's always been this tokenistic thing in that you can have as many white pop singers as you like, but there's only so much room for Black artists, and that's not making an issue about it. That's how it's been. The industry has changed, and it's still the same. So if the issues were still there then, and they're still there now, there definitely is something there. That means, you know, there's only so much room, and you know, you don't, obviously she's a bit of an exception to use an example, but it's very easy for somebody like Adele, who's singing, if you like, a soulful singer, to get that radio play, or even an Amy Winehouse when she was, you know, here still with us, from a traditionally Black culture type of music. It is easier for them to become popular and to be favoured on radio, for it to be more palatable, if you like. So I absolutely do think that it's not the full story. Like I said earlier, I think class plays a part in it, but I don't think we can ignore that race has been and still is a factor in it.
Yeah, 100%.
Just from my perspective as a plugger, over the last couple of weeks, last week, just from a Radio 1 sense, last week I had Bella going into the Radio 1 playlist, but I knew that I had Ray Black going into the playlist for this week, and I was like, I can't have Bella and Ray go in on the same week. It's impossible. And I know that next week I'll have Mahalia going in the week after. Like they just won't take that on. They're going to take one a week. Let's be honest. They're going to take one a week. So, and that's, and you know, that's exactly what Loretta's saying. You know, there's you've got your one chance at one station, and it's few and far between. So I'm constantly having to go, oh, well, if I'm taking this Black record in this week, then I won't be able to take that other record. You know, it's just, it's crazy, but unfortunately that's just how it is, you know, so.
No, definitely. I think that's from each of you. That's kind of pointed. I think we've been able to kind of explain the Black funnel, coming from radio, coming from a plugger, coming from a manager, all the challenges that come with it. What I did want to kind of touch on is a bit more about local and community stations and the role that they play within an artist's journey. Because it said that because of the loops, as we referred it to, with the major stations being a lot harder, some artists and managers are feeling as though radio isn't necessarily of a larger importance as it was previously. So do we feel, well, what is the value and importance more so of a local community radio station now? We'll swing that to you first, David.
I think it's just important to have your feet solidified on the ground, man. And like what I always say to the people that are on my team and the artists that we work with, it's like, yo, we are like the tastemakers for anything that's gonna go popular from our genre. The artists, the DJs, the presenters, whatever you guys are saying that's good and it's reflective of, like, because obviously we start with parties. We've got a party called Recess, and for my age range, or I would say between 19 to about 21, 22 years old, it's probably one of the hottest parties in London, one of the biggest parties in London. That's before we was doing radio. So we could play a song, like artists would come to our parties, radio pluggers was coming to our parties, like our friends, people that work at Spotify, they'll come to our parties because they were our friends, our age mates, we grew up together. We play a song, the reaction goes big. The next week you're seeing it in this playlist, you're seeing this radio station playing it. Like, it was like the reaction, the domino effect was crazy, and people was like, okay, cool, this is kind of sick to see, but no one's ever gonna know that it started in a party in Hackney or a party in Brixton, or do you know what I mean? They're never gonna know this unless you're on Snapchat or your Instagram, you have friends that's about. You're never gonna know this, isn't it? So, but if those little moments don't happen, it's never gonna get to that point of being like a global hit where Radio 1 and Capital and Kiss are going to pick up. It's just never going to happen. Like, I don't know one artist, especially from the Black music, that has never gone through any part of the culture, whether it's teen music, which I would say like the teen Afro pop, or whether it's R&B.
Oh, sorry, can we get someone to mute themselves? Well, MMF, are we able to mute? Yeah, go ahead, David.
Yes, cool. Yeah, whether it's R&B, like no matter what the genre is, as long as it's black and it's coming from the black culture, somehow it's been accepted somewhere. Do you know what I mean? So it's like, for example, Bella, that we was supporting Bella way before Evil Eye. Like we had loved Bella, and the reason I love Bella is because my friend is her friend, and that 2018 we must have met at my party. We went to studio, we was chilling, just making music together, relaxing. This before she was that big, like 2-3 years ago. And it's like, we've known Bella. So by the time we've had no signal, it was like, yeah, man, let's support Bella. That's everyone that we know loves Bella. Everyone in the culture loves Bella. So by the time Evil Eye came, it was just perfect. It was like, it was so beautiful to see. Same as just so many artists I can just put an example as, even Stormzy. Like, I remember we first booked Stormzy in 2016. We paid Stormzy like 250 quid. And I remember the people that I was doing the parties with in uni, they were like, who the hell is this guy? He didn't have Wicked Scam. And I was like, nah, the people in the ends are feeling it. Like, they're feeling this guy. Like, we should book him, 6 months later, they're winning a mobile. Like, we can never predict that, but we kind of, I'm not saying we dictate what happens, but we're amongst the conversation. We're there with the people in the house parties, in the raves, in these places. So by the time it gets to that point, it's like, okay, we knew this was going to happen. It doesn't happen, doesn't work all the time. But yeah, it's like, it's very important that you have your feet solidified in your community. Like whether it's your local radio station, whether it's an internet radio station, it's like you need people to champion you, because by the time, even when you get to have that hit, like look what happened to Rams. He had his hit, he went into a big stage, the media cussed him, but he was there to support him when he was on his ground. It was the black people, even though some black people were cussing him as well. But when it got so big, you saw a lot of black people come there to support him. Like, nah, this has gone too far now. We need to support Rams. We need to help Rams. We even start at No Signal. We start to playlist him. We start to speak to him. We reached out to him. We was like trying to support him because we was like, yo, at the end of the day, he's part of us. He's one of us in it. So if he's been chucked and chewed by the mainstream media, he's got to have somewhere to go. And if we hadn't known Rams before that, and Rams just went straight to Capital and he went straight to Kiss, then you have nowhere to fall in it. But he had somewhere comfortably to fall, and that's why you now see Rams is now he's in a better place as a human being. So it's important you have a community behind you.
Definitely, I love that. So you touched on it as part of the community and the audience. How these stations kind of determined what they, I guess, playlist and kind of put on play like constantly is based on the needs of what they say is their audience. So how do we get the audience, do you think, to go from the community stations over to the major stations to show them that there is clearly more of a need than they think?
I feel like with those people, the mainstream stations, big stations, they generally just care about numbers. I'm saying that from a radio side. I'm also saying that from like an A&R side, trying to plug artists. Like they literally just care about numbers, innit? But for us, at No Signal, for example, we have so many different shows. So when I say an artist let's say an artist comes and emails me or DMs me, and I reply, most of the people I can reply, and they're like, yo, I want you to play this song on NS10V10. And I'm just thinking in my head, bro, if I play this song on NS10V10, because it's a very much a Twitter audience, and Twitter are very fickle. Like Twitter are a horrible place. They can love you and then they can hate you 1 minute. They love us 1 minute, they cuss us the next day. Do you know what I mean? So if I play you on this show, I just know what these people are going to say, and it's not going to be good for you because they're going to cuss you. And it's happened so many times before. But I said, but there's another show. We might have like a gospel show on a Monday, or there's a specialist and a piano show we have on a Thursday, or this show we have on a Friday. Like that will fit this song that you've got. It just wouldn't fit that NS10V10 show. But the artist will nag, and there might be a friend I might have to do a favor, play the song. Next minute, people are tweeting on the hashtag. The hashtag's #1 on Twitter, so it's a big show. 100,000 people listening. What shit is this? Turn this shit off. People texting in, like cussing this person, and it's not good to see. It's hurting me because I'm thinking, damn, like I don't want to see this person get crushed. And you can see the person by the way they're tweeting, replying, people that their ego's been crushed, their soul's been crushed because Twitter's a horrible place. But I did advise them, like, yo, bro, yo, sis, yo, so and so, like, I could play you on this show instead, where you get a better reaction to the people that listen in and tune in at this hour or this 2 hours. They will love this song, they will love this music. But the people for this show, they wouldn't love that. So when I say audience, that's what I'm talking about. But for the mainstream, I think want to see numbers. They want to see it reacting. They'll probably say if they see Capital play it, then they might, okay, Capital's playing it. Maybe we should playlist it. I don't really know how they work, but that's from what I can see and my experience. That's maybe Mel will have a better answer for that.
No, I completely agree with everything you've said. I think it is very numbers led in these mainstream stations. There's a couple of people in the music teams that are definitely watching what you guys are doing at No Signal and Represent and West Side and that kind of thing. So they're definitely keeping an eye on what you guys are playing, but it's not enough people, and they're not necessarily listening to the stations themselves, or that, you know, they might just be taking what's happening on Shade Borough or UK Gossip or something like that. If they see a retweet about a particular track, then they may be interested, but other than that, it's very much a numbers led thing, unfortunately. And it might not necessarily be big numbers, it might be just reactive numbers, you know, off the back of a play. Like Shazam can be very important for that kind of thing. So if you're if you can register your song on Shazam, and you do actually just get a play on, you know, a smaller show on mainstream, and then you can check how many plays that how many Shazams you got off that. They always like to hear about that kind of stuff. So any reaction to a play is always good, wherever it is, for sure.
I just wanted to mention as well that actually why it was so valuable, what David just said, is exactly he responded to that question, and maybe because you've got your A&R hat as well, David, but you don't get that kind of feedback again, and that's because you understand the culture. And that's why you should listen if you go to a David and he tells you this is not going to hit here, but it will hit here. But there's so many other hoops to jump through before you get to that point with the mainstream stations that we're talking about, that is not even going to be talked about in terms of this would be a good route for you. The criteria, just like Mel was just saying, it is about numbers, but it's different numbers, because you could say, well, look at all these YouTube streams of this live video, but that doesn't count. It's a certain kind of numbers from a certain kind of audience, but then the fact that they react to if something's blowing up somewhere else and looking at these stations again is because it's not necessarily about a care for the culture or the progression of that artist or of their journey. It's this is popping off, we need to have a bit of that, not that I'm not saying that they've got the time to give, you know, valued critique back, but to be honest, when I worked at the radio station, and maybe that's because of my background as an artist and as an artist manager, I would reply and give some feedback. What's the point of just saying, no, it's not good enough? I would say, you could try this here, or I suggest you do this, that they can take or leave that, but at least something's got back then, rather than being reduced to numbers and, oh, I've got the numbers, but they're the wrong kind of numbers. So I think even that, again, it comes down to the understanding the culture and having people who understand the culture, who can even give you some feedback as to why something isn't being played, because sometimes I feel like they don't even know why, really. It's just, we just don't play it. Why? We just don't.
No, definitely. I think as we speak on numbers, we also have to look into the disparity of pay per play between different stations. So MMF and myself have kind of reached out to PRS and PPL and just tried to get an overview as to how do they pay, and what's kind of the deciding factors, and how they kind of go about this when it's reviewed. And I think between both, it's kind of understood as it's again to do with the audience reach. Paul, I'm not sure if you wanted to elaborate a bit more on that.
I mean, I can, yeah. We spoke to PPL and PRS because quite a few managers are aware of the enormous pay disparity between, say, a play on One Extra and a play on Radio 2. And so we wanted to find out a little bit more about how those numbers are made, and they are based on audience reach. And so, you know, it's basically based on the station rather than, and that's where the funnel has potentially issues around equity, because you've got to build through, say, one extra as a black music artist, whereas you might go straight into a Radio 2 show for your first play if you're a different, you know, different genre, different race. So when we were speaking to PRS and PPL, we just wanted clarification on how they reached those figures, and they are audience based and they are reviewed annually. So and also there's not a disparity between at what time of day the track was paid. So they're sort of forever moving, dependent on the audience size, but they are quite sort of stable because the station's audiences don't move that much. So there's definitely an equity issue there if you're expected as a black artist to build through, or you know, that's where you can play in one extra. So that was quite interesting for us to sort of explore, and we're considering sort of these conversations about how we can talk to radio a little bit more through the Unite work we're doing.
Yeah, no, definitely. So, so I think before we head on to questions, and if you do have any questions, please put in the chat box and we will read it. We spoke a bit earlier about there being a lack of people, these major stations being more understanding, knowing the culture, and just there being ultimately needing more diverse. How do we kind of start going about getting more people into radio? And I want to swing it to you, Mel, in particular. How do, like, if an artist wants to reach radio pluggers, I mean, I can imagine you're inundated. How many radio pluggers would you say there are, especially those that specialize in black music?
That's a tough question. There are pluggers. How can I say this nicely? There are pluggers that believe that they can do all black music. Whether they can do it or not is a completely different thing. I don't think that there's a lot that actually can do it and really understand black music. I think black music is very popular right now. So everybody wants to jump on the bandwagon of whatever's popular. But the people that can actually really do black music, you know, there's a difference. There are some pluggers that will just cater to community. There are some that just cater to specialist, which is the specialist stations such as One Extra, Capital Extra, Kiss Fresh, those kind of stations. And then there's a national plugger who could do between specialist and the radio ones, the Capital FMs, etc., etc. So there's from a community standpoint, I think that there's quite a few. There's probably about 10, 15. And from a specialist point of view, independent is probably around the same, maybe a bit less. And national, there's so many. There's so many. There's probably about 60 that do national. But that's across all genres. In terms of black music, there's probably about 20, I would think, 20, 25. So yeah, it's just about finding that one that, you know, I think that there's some pluggers that are better at certain genres than others. There's some that can do all of black music. There's some that are better at R&B. Like, I get a lot of R&B artists. I think once you get one and you're successful with one, everybody comes to you with that one. There's a lot that will do, you know, alternative rap. Those kind of rappers that might sit on 6 Music are different pluggers to the ones that will sit on Radio 1, for instance. So it's about just doing your research and, you know, just seeing what kind of artists they might plug, what they can specialize in. But yeah, research is very, very key. There's a lot of people out there though.
Oh, wicked. And Loretta and David, similar kind of questions for you insofar as finding these pluggers that Mel has mentioned, knowing the right ones, and I guess David, for you, insofar as, do you guys use any, or is it kind of just more the in-house team, just keeping your ear to the ground?
It's a bit of both, but we love radio pluggers because they have access as well. Even though we have a great relationship with artists, sometimes it just keeps that little keeps it a bit professional when you use a radio plugger, especially when you ask for an interview or you ask for an appearance for something that you're doing, whatever it may be, or collaboration. Radio pluggers have been most of our big stuff that we've done in terms of like with artists. For example, we did the HHSC basketball game and we live streamed it on our YouTube and we broadcasted it as well for a radio plugger. Most of the big things, I would say radio pluggers are very important, especially for accessibility to the artists, because they speak to the artists way more than we do, and probably have a better relationship, and they kind of look at their radio pluggers as advisors as well, that this would be a good thing. So if we have a good relationship with the radio plugger, and say we do have a relationship with the artist as well, it's good to have the radio plugger as well, because they would advise like, it is good to go to No Signal, it is good to go to Represent, etc., etc. So yeah, radio pluggers are very important to us.
I haven't got much to add, Nicole, just that, it's really difficult to find a really good radio plugger. And also it's just, I think going back to something Mel said right at the beginning, it's also the last thing that you add, because of, the small guarantee of whether it will work, finding someone who will take you on, because like everyone knows there are those small windows. So there's black music's popular at the moment. There's not many radio pluggers who understand the culture. So finding people who have got the ability to be able to take you on, because just like David said, there's lots of excellent music out there, like we've always known, for black artists, but those slots are few and far between. So it's definitely been a challenge, and we've just built as much of the story by ourselves, so building up relationships with the specialist stations, with DJs ourselves, so personal relationships with them, so that they would support next time round. That's been really important, doing just as much as we can as an independent team, and then finding a radio plugger that understood the culture in particular, to be able to present that story in the way that it could translate, was a challenge. And I think that hadn't been successful in the past, but like I said, in the last year we've had more success with that than we have before. But yeah, it's really difficult. We need more Mels.
Definitely so. Cool. I think with that kind of all being said, I think we're kind of happy to open up the floor to see if anyone has any questions. I think I did see a few in the chat box. So Nola, if I can get you to read out the first question for me.
The first question was by William, and he asked, does radio need quotas in order to be accountable for their bias?
I think the BBC in particular have a discussed quota. I think Radio 1 did. I don't know if it's still the case, but I think for them originally it was in terms of how much UK music they would be playing compared to US music. So I think it used to be 60-40. So it was 60 for UK, 40 for US. That might have changed now. It's not something that is really discussed. In terms of black music, I don't know if they have a specific quota for that. I know that they feel like they need to be supporting black music because it is popular and it's in the chart, obviously. So I don't know what they say internally these days, but it should really be in place for all stations. I think. Totally agree.
In certain countries, it is right now. In France, they really protect their own culture. In Holland, they did the same. And I've had many arguments when I was doing Cleo from Cleopatra on my own label. We took her solo. We got A-list, Choice, Kiss, everywhere. When we went to Radio 1, they said, well, we've got Anne-Marie and Beyonce. I went nuts, you know. I was like, this is a British station paid for by, you know, British people. Why aren't you supporting your own? And that is always an issue I have doing black music. You know, fighting a budget for Wes Khalifa against SP or, you know, some young rapper. You can't compete. It's impossible.
Yeah.
So it's something that I've actually started a work group with the MFM about 15 years ago on, when I was at Big Life, to try and address that. More so just from a national protection, whether it be black, white, Indian, as you probably got from my earlier comments, you know, it's just a country. And I want to protect our export, whatever music that is. You know, sure, I've got my personal preferences to black music, but I want to protect British music.
Yeah, no, definitely. I remember going to France, which is so close to us, and I went with two artists that were fairly big. Things like Heady One was there, Anon T was there, a few artists was there, like a writing camp, and we was with some of the biggest artists in France, like MHD and a few others, and bro, like they didn't know Heady at that time. This is 3 years ago. They didn't know Unknown T, and like everyone was just looking at each other like, "Yo, this is kind of crazy." Like, and we mentioned so many artists. They said, "Yeah, Stormzy." They know Stormzy because Stormzy's like a everywhere kind of thing. But like they mentioned Big Shaq because that was like a global like meme thing. That's who they knew, and we was like, "Yo," and they're like, "You need to understand that in France, the law is 80% French music, and then the 20%, it's not going to be British. It's probably going to be American music. So you guys don't have like there's no space for you in the radio, so no one is going to know you guys here, and that's some of that is down the road, like literally not far from us. You can get to France very quickly, whether it's ferry or by plane. So it's like, yeah, that would be a thing. I think that would help in terms of that making it British, and then also in that as well, having a certain percentages as well for black music because of the influence we do have in music as a whole as well is very important as well.
You know, in France, they don't need us, right? They've got a rap business so healthy. A very good friend of mine, Puga, is a multi-millionaire, lives in France. I don't know if any of you know. He's got his own label deal with Universal. He dominates radio. And it's why Jay-Z, Nas, Wu-Tang Clan all have their worldwide headquarters in France, not London now, right? They've all switched to Paris because it's a breakout city to Europe, right? You know, I've done the same with Krish that Mel knows. Mel worked Krish at Warner's. It didn't work. So I don't want to say I don't care about radio in England because I do, but they're not supporting it. So I've switched my focus to other territories and it's starting to work. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I think a lot of people are kind of doing the same. Loretta, did you want to comment?
And I don't think I've got anything better to add than David and Mel have already said.
No worries. Nola, what's our next question?
Our next question basically is in regards to genre searching that we were discussing earlier, and it's by Car. I'm so sorry if I'm mispronouncing your name. How do we know what people like if it's not presented in front of them? I'm assuming on radio.
So So, we've been having a lot of conversation about the word genre at our station. One time I went to Nigeria and I met this guy. He works at Maven, his name Tega. Maven's pretty big. Like, they have Rema in the past. Have had like the band, and they're just really, really huge music company. And they had all these studios, and on the doors it was like moods. So then they had moods on each room. So instead of having genres for the producers would look at what room, what mood they're feeling, and they will go in there and play something to match that mood. And I was like, yo, this is very sick, because they don't like to use the word genre, because nowadays artists, most of these artists, they don't even stick to one genre. They might mix it with something else. For example, Bella Eve, she's an R&B artist, but it still has a little bit of a African vibe to it. She's added a twist to it. So it's like, that's why the song is so beautiful, because it doesn't just stick in R&B. It's bigger than R&B. It's a beautiful song. It's an exceptional record. So it's like, when you have moments like that, it just makes you think that, okay, this genre thing, boxing all these things into genre, is like, life doesn't really reflect like that. Because even when you go on Spotify now, more time when you see the playlist, it's like moods. It'd be like, bedroom music or ambience. That it's always moods is kind of the thing, really. So I don't know. We kind of try and base things on moods and the time of the day. So like when it gets to maybe in the morning, our breakfast show, we're like trying to wake people up. So it'll be a certain type of music. Like you're gonna make sure, okay, you're getting ready for the day. Then when you get to the afternoon, we kind of chill it off a bit, maybe a little bit more talking, and the music is a bit more calmer. Then it gets to that, maybe the hump part of the day. Is that on a Wednesday, we have a show called Hump Day, where it's that bang in the middle of the day, or around 3 o'clock, because it's that weird time where you're about to finish work, you want work to finish, and it's kind of like it's the middle of the week. So you're like, you want the week to finish also as well. So it's called Hump Day. It's called the Hump Day show. So it's like, we kind of try to base our shows on the mood of the day and a specific time of the week. So it's like, yeah, the genre of things is, I don't know, for me, the way we kind of operate, we try not to operate on genres too much, because if we was to say genres, we play so many genres, it's unbelievable. We play black rock, but we don't say we're playing black rock. It's just that show and that time of the day, it fits it. So we play that type of music. So it's like, yeah, it's kind of just moods for us, you know.
No, definitely.
That's happening at some of the other, they've probably stolen the idea from you guys. But yeah, I feel like that's happening at some stations now as well. Like Capital Extra in the evening time, they have like a chill out kind of segment from about 10 o'clock or something like that. So they'll play, that kind of chill out mood thing. BBC Sounds, which is it's kind of like their DSP, BBC's DSP's section. They've got their own different moods playlists now, and you can get tracks added to those playlists, and then those are reflected onto the radio stations and stuff. So they'll have like a relax playlist, they'll have a chill playlist. I was able to get a couple of African artists that don't necessarily sit in Afrobeats, because there's a lot of artists from Africa, and people just automatically think, oh, they're doing Afrobeats, and they're not. They're doing R&B. They're doing, obviously this Amapiano is coming through now. There's a lot of people that are doing pop music or dance music, or but automatically, as soon as they see Nigerian artists, they automatically think that they need to go into Edu's show on BBC One Extra. Which is not the case for a lot of the artists. So you're able to put those
I think we're missing some of what you're saying, Mel. You moved your mic. No, we're missing the. Yeah.
My laptop is going crazy.
Oh no, missed you again. But I think we definitely was getting the gist, and I think the mood idea is definitely something that needs to be further implemented a lot from some of the more radio stations. Nola, do we have any more questions?
We have a few questions and a few statements.
No worries. Let's fire through some of the questions and then we will start closing up.
One of the questions is, do you guys think it's harder for artists from the north of our country and outside of London or major cities?
And should we, Loretta, do you want to?
Yeah, sure. In terms, obviously, we're talking about radio. I don't think that's necessarily a factor that makes it more difficult. I think because if anything, I've also been told the opposite, that London, for example, so obviously the BBC brought BBC Introducing as a way for grassroots artists, because of them being out of touch with what's going on the ground. That was one route, and you do that, you might play live, and then you might get a spot play or something. And actually the London BBC Introducing gets way more submissions than any other region. And sometimes I know artists that I've coached that have been advised to put where their kind of hometown is or where their parents are, even if they're based in London, and they're more likely to get the radio play then. Now, there's a whole other argument about whether spot play on BBC Introducing actually helps you in your journey in radio, but that's just an example of that where you are geographically doesn't necessarily make a difference with that. If you were talking about gig opportunities and touring and maybe even labels because of getting actually in person into meetings and showcases, that might be a factor. But I think for radio, and certainly if we're talking like we are a lot about Radio 1, I kind of don't like the pedestal that's been put on, but they're the ones that have set up BBC Introducing for that very reason, to spread out into the regions. And I think they do have a policy where it doesn't favour London. So that's the only way I know how to answer that one, really.
Oh, no worries. Thank you so much. And David has to shoot off, but we do want to say thank you for your insight and knowledge today. It's much appreciated.
Thank you. Appreciate it, everyone.
No worries. And I think, Nola, if we take maybe one last question. We got one?
Most of the questions were answered during, but someone had said thank you very much for the knowledgeable panel and their thoughts. Such a shame that we still are having to talk about race in class in 2021 to get to play amongst other factors. And then they had a meeting and they just said thank you again.
No worries. Thank you. Well, yeah, like I said, and especially if our questions have been answered already, it means we've touched on some interesting and important topics within this discussion today. So we definitely want to say thank you to Loretta, David, who's gone, and Mel for their time today, and again, their insight and information. And I guess if there's anyone that wants to kind of know more or pick their brains, then by all means, feel free to reach out to them. We've dropped their social handles in the chat. And Nola, if you don't mind doing it again for me. So thank you for joining us today. We do have our next Unite session on the 10th of August. And we are aware that everybody at this moment in time has probably got Zoom fatigue. The sun is shining. We want to be outside. We've had somewhat Freedom Day announced for the 19th. So what we are doing is looking to, Paul looks excited. We're trying to move this for the next session to an in-person event where everybody can kind of intermingle. I know there's a few regulars who've been joining us since February to network. So yeah, I'll definitely say anyone that's an MMF member on the call, I would say look out for your newsletters for more information. Anyone that's not an MMF member, sign up to our Unite newsletter. Nola, if we can drop that link into the chat or drop us an email. And anybody that wants to get into radio, currently Your Army have a position where they're looking for a national radio plugger. So I would say definitely check them out on LinkedIn. Or Selena is kind of the main lady who's leaning on that. I know, BBC did have one, but the closing date was yesterday, unfortunately. But yeah, if you want any more insight information, then feel free to hit up anyone from MMF team. We are at MMF Unite at MMF.net. And yeah, once again, thank you all for joining us. If you want to drop your socials and network, by all means do so.